Planning Commission meeting. This meeting is still being held remotely as it's not practical nor prudent at the time for the commission and its committees to meet in person or pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.02. In light of the ongoing pandemic, members of the Planning Commission will not be at the regular location, and all members will be attending by telephone or other electronic means. We will begin this meeting by doing a roll call. Sonia, can we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Anderson, Commissioner Baker,
Here.
Commissioner DeJoy, Commissioner Grill,
Here.
Commissioner Hood,
Here.
Commissioner Holt,
Here.
Commissioner Kantner,
Here.
Commissioner McMurphy,
Here.
Commissioner Mitchell, Commissioner Moore,
Here.
Commissioner Preston,
Here.
Commissioner Riley,
Here.
Commissioner Whistler,
Here.
Commissioner Knight, Commissioner Tagia,
Here.
Thomas,
Here. Here.
Wood,
I'm here, but it's really hard to hear you.
oh, I'm sorry, I don't know why.
There's a lot of static. Maybe people need to mute.
I try to mute. I don't know why. Mr. Yang? Mr. Yang?
Yes, here.
I'm gonna go back to Commissioner Mitchell because I think she's here. Commissioner Anderson, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. And of course, the chair.
Present, and so we'll move on to the next item of the agenda. I don't have any new announcements at the moment. Moving on to Luis's announcements. Luis, do you have any announcements today?
Yes, Chair and commissioners and members of the public. I do have a couple of announcements. Good morning. So I wanted to spread the word that PED, Department of Planning and Economic Development, we are hiring for a deputy director position and need help spreading the word. Just a bit about the role. It will serve as the administrative and operations manager for the department, overseeing accounting, real estate, and loan servicing, federal grants management, HR, and public relations. The position will also assist with our annual department budget, providing leadership over business process improvement and record and file retention and compliance, as well as evaluation of and selection of technology tools. The position's open until filled. I can provide the link to the position description in the chat, and feel free to reach out with questions or direct folks who might be interested to that link. And I'll just say, some of you may know Kristen Guild, who was our deputy director prior, and she recently left us. And I probably can sort of speak for the staff on the PED team that we're very sad that she's left us. She was just really a great asset to our department. She served as an interim PED director when we were in between directors. So essentially did 2 jobs for, I don't know how many months it was, but so really was, superwoman in that position. And so, big shoes to fill, big role, but we definitely need it. And we're looking forward to getting a great pool of candidates to assist us. Secondly, I just wanted to kind of pre-welcome. I wanted to welcome back Reconnect Rondo to the Planning Commission. You'll note that's on the agenda today. You might recall Reconnect Rondo presented to the commission about actually almost exactly 2 years ago, on July 12th, 2019. So this time we'll be joined by Reconnect's Executive Director, Mr. Keith Baker, along with their board chair, Mr. Martin Anderson. And so just to preview a bit, though I don't know exactly what they're going to say, Reconnect's been busy engaging with the community, working with ULI, working with MnDOT, the county, and the city on various funding efforts. And I'll just point out our key staff on the planning team who's been focused most on this is Tony Johnson, also partnering closely with Ross Courier on the economic development team. Though I'll just note PED leadership and the mayor's office staff have also been at the table in some of the recent activities. And Noel Nix is on the board of Reconnect Rondo, so there's a great connection there. So a warm pre-welcome to Reconnect Rondo in joining us today. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Any question for the director? Moving on to the next item on the agenda is zoning committee. Turn it over to Commissioner Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I have a few updates, and then I will turn it over to staff, Ms. Sigwart, to provide a short presentation on one of the cases that we just reviewed at zoning committee. I currently don't have any information about the upcoming site plan review. We can provide that information when it is available. There are a few items for the upcoming zoning committee meeting scheduled for July 15th. 695 Grand Avenue, which is the conditional use permit for building height with variances. And we will see this item, we'll talk about this item a little bit in a little while. 402 Front Avenue, which is also a conditional use permit for supportive housing facilities. And 1945 Rome Avenue, an appeal of a lot split approved by the planning administrator. So during our July 1st zoning committee meeting, we had only one item, and it was 695. It was at 695 Grand Avenue. It was a rezoning from B2 Community Business District and EG East Grand Avenue Overlay District to T3 Traditional Neighborhood District without the EG East Grand Overlay. This was a very somewhat complex, but also we received a lot of interest from the public. There's a lot of engagement around the potential project here. And based on some of the complexity, we wanted to ensure that commissioners had information before making this vote. And so we have staff member Sigworth here to provide a short presentation concerning this project. And she will be also here to answer any questions. I will come back after her to just provide some information on the meeting and how things turned out in the recommendation that was given. So with that, Chair, if you're comfortable with it, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Sigwart.
Go ahead, Chair.
All right, thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right, so I'm just going to do a kind of a shortened version of what was presented at the zoning committee meeting to help illustrate the case a little bit more. All right, so here are photos of the current site. It's a large parking lot on the eastern half of the site and a building with 3 restaurants on its western half. The site is on a corner lot in a mixed-use area along Grand, and there are bus routes that run along Grand and Dale. And I also wanted to clarify the historic district questions that came up at the zoning committee meeting. So the property is part of the Historic Hill District, which is a state historic district. And the property was determined to be non-contributing in the 2017 review by Heritage Preservation staff. And this was confirmed by the State Historic Preservation Office. So no EAW or any other review or approvals are needed for being in the State Historic District. The proposal, it's a 5-story mixed-use building with 4 commercial spaces on the ground floor, 80 market rate apartment buildings, 80 bike spaces, and 99 vehicular parking stalls. Here's a proposal of the site plan. You can see the commercial spaces and the parking behind. Here's some renderings of the building. You can see the outdoor seating area along Grand and the prominent corridor entrance here, and the 4 stories of apartments below. And at the next meeting, you will be reviewing the variances in the CUP, so I don't want to focus so much on this building, but you'll be seeing a lot more of it next time. So this is just for the rezoning to T3 without the East Grand Overlay District. So here's some of the stats of the proposed building. The footprint is 30,500 square feet, height is 5910, and the total area of 108 square feet excluding parking. The current B2 zoning limits heights to 30 feet and an FAR of 2.0. The current East Grand Avenue Overlay District restricts footprints to 25,000 square feet, the size is 75,000 square feet, and heights to 36 feet for mixed-use buildings. The proposed T3 district allows building heights of 55 feet plus additional height based on setbacks and a conditional use permit and an FAR of 3.0. I wanted to share some information about the background of the overlay district. It was adopted shortly after the District 16 Summit Hill Neighborhood Plan was adopted in 2006, which includes the policies that are part of the overlay district today. The intent in the zoning code is simply to provide design standards and height, size, and footprint limits. And then from my research, from what I can gather, the original strategy of the overlay was to moderate the pace of development to prevent big box or chain retail and the displacement of independent businesses. So kind of to retain the neighborhood character. All right, so we found that the proposed T3 zoning is consistent with the way the area has developed. T3 is designed for higher density pedestrian and transit-oriented development that could be on sites within an existing neighborhood center and a mix of commercial and residential uses. Grand Avenue is a mixed-use transit street with a mix of housing types and densities and commercial businesses. As you can see in the image, the building height allowed in the T3 district is similar to the heights of the surrounding buildings. There are many that are in the 40 to 50 range. And then there is a taller one, 65 feet tall. So a lot of these don't fit with the overlay district already. The proposed T3 zoning is consistent with the land use chapter of the comprehensive plan. The area is in a mixed use area, which is intended to be the most dynamic areas of the city and provide the highest densities outside of downtown. There are also policies here which are supported, which deal with allowing commercial development fronting arterial streets, which Grand Avenue is designated as in our transportation plan. Also supporting transit sort of density, using land more efficiently, facilitating business creation and retention. All right, we also found that T3 zoning is consistent with the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan. This is supported by the policy that deals with supporting new housing, particularly in mixed use areas with existing transit. And this is to meet the demand of living in walkable urban neighborhoods, such as Grand Avenue area, Summit Hill. We found that the T3 zoning is consistent with the 2006 Summit Hill District Neighborhood Plan. It's supported by these policies which deal with maintaining Grand as a continuous retail and residential corridor, adopting TN design standards for the overlay, which also apply in the T3 district, and then supporting locally owned businesses, which this project does. We found that the proposed zoning out of the East Grand Overlay District is not consistent with the 2006 Summit Hill District 16 neighborhood plan. It's because of this policy that describes the overlay with the height and scale limitations for new buildings on Grant Avenue. So while the Summit Hill Association is currently updating their plan and considering changes, this policy is currently in effect. Found that the proposed T3 zoning is compatible with the surrounding uses. These include retail, restaurants, service buildings, medium density residential on Grand. And T3 also has the same traditional neighborhood design standards that apply to the surrounding properties within the overlay. We found that the proposed zoning is not spot zoning, which is illegal in Minnesota, because the T3 uses are similar to the uses permitted in the surrounding districts. The overlay district provides design standards and height and size limits, but does not establish a use classification. And the proposed zoning to T3 without the overlay district does not establish a use classification inconsistent with the surrounding uses. So this is the zoning committee recommendation. Approval of proposed rezoning from B2 to T3 and denial of the proposed rezoning out of the East Grand Avenue Overlay District. And this is also what the Summit Hill Association recommended. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Sigler. Through the chair, I just wanted to add a few more items before highlighting the recommendation. The first thing is during the zoning committee meeting, we made a concerted effort to ensure that we focused on the rezoning effort and not the variances and the conditional use permit. And so I just highlight that to my colleagues that the variances and the CUP is coming or potentially coming at a later time, our next planning commission meeting. But for this, our job and task was to focus on rezoning. And so we tried our best to do that in how we voted during the zoning committee. I just wanted to reiterate that the district council did submit a letter of approval for the project, and their recommendation fell, as Ms. Sigward said, down the lines of what they approved and then what they denied, specifically around the overlay district. They felt like that should be a different process, hence why we have another application coming back before us to the zoning committee next week. I also wanted to highlight that there were 3 people who spoke in favor of the application and 18 people who spoke in opposition during the public hearing. We received 50 letters of support for this project, specifically for this application, and 480 letters in opposition of the application or the project. And so with that, Chair, the zoning committee voted to approve staff's recommendation for the rezoning from B2 to T3, but denial of the rezoning out of the EG East Grand Overlay District. And that vote was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was 5-2.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
So we did have 2 people that did not agree, but it passed 5-2.
Okay, so the motion coming out of committee is to approve the rezoning from B2 community business to T3 traditional neighborhood without the EG East Grand Overlay District. We will now open it up for discussions. And I see Commissioner Riley had his hand up. Commissioner Riley? And then Commissioner Tagia. Commissioner Riley?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. I lost my unmute button. I see that Director Pereira has had his hand up, and I'm wondering if there are questions first before I state the reasons for my vote. I was one of the 2 people who voted to deny.
Sure, I'll turn to Director Pereira.
Chair and commissioners and members of the public, I just wanted to note that there was some question here in the chat about whether the public comment is accepted today, and I don't know if you wanted to just note that it's not a public hearing today. It's a conversation about the zoning committee recommendation, And, you know, like you said, a chance to ask questions, understand the staff position, understand the committee's position, understand those who voted for and against. So just for folks to understand, I think it might be helpful to point that out.
Sure. So today is not a public hearing. The public hearing was held this past Thursday. As Commissioner Baker, there was several people that came, 18 people that came and spoke in favor, 3 or 4 that came, against, and 3 or 4 that spoke in favor of it. Depending on what happens with today's motion, the matter would then go, it might go to City Council, and then there would be another public portion at that time. But for today's purposes, it is just for the Planning Commission to vote based on the motion coming out of the committee, which was to approve. So I'll turn back to Commissioner Riley for his input.
Thank you, Chair. And I'll just go through. I wrote up my thoughts this time because I often don't do a good job expressing myself if I don't. So bear with me here just a minute. But I voted against, and I'll give you the rationale for why. And I want to let folks know that I did share this with the city attorney, with the chair, Commissioner Taguieff, who sits on the Summit Hill Association board. Um, and some city staff. I neglected to copy Chair Baker, and I apologize for that as chair of the zoning committee. But first, I want to clearly, so thank you for everyone for giving me the grace to listen to my rationale here. I'd like to clearly express what I understand to be our role as zoning committee members and planning commissioners. As stated by Zoning Committee Chair Baker, in this case, we are charged solely with making a rational zoning decision that for a rezoning and a rezoning only is a legislative decision. Most of our decisions are thought of as quasi-judicial. In any rezoning, the law presumes an existing zoning ordinance is constitutional and an applicant only is entitled to a change if they can demonstrate the existing zoning is unsupported by any rational basis related to the public health, safety, and welfare. And in fact, that is the principal reason for a zoning code of ordinances. History notwithstanding, cities use zoning to guide private development and to ensure land gets used in a way that promotes both the best use of the land and the prosperity, health, and welfare of residents. Central to that are zoning regulations that limit the types and locations of structures and often control some of the following things, including building location, height, width, and bulk, number of stories, size of buildings and other structures, the percentage of lot space occupied, the size of yards and other open spaces, the density and distribution of population, and access to direct sunlight for solar energy systems, and also generally sunlight and air for health. When we're approached with the rezoning application, we look at how each of the disparate zoning districts not only identify permitted, conditional or otherwise, uses and prohibited uses, as well as setbacks, height, and density requirements. Thus, when a colleague noted most of the complaints about the structure have to do with scale, density, and massing issues which are not related to rezoning, I knew I had to develop a clear argument because they're indeed central to it. I also tried to be concise, but those of you who know that know it's hard sometimes for me to speak concisely, and this is a legal matter, so it's extra difficult sometimes. However, that's precisely why I voted to deny the rezoning request. Zoning districts define a building's scale, density, and massing. In this scenario, the commission is being asked to rezone a single parcel to the T3 zoning district. T districts are St. Paul's mixed-use districts, and in fact, they echo and expand upon when appropriate, such as on fixed route transit lines like the Green Line, the historic built environment of the city, dating from when there were multiple streetcar lines in the city and the region. This is an important framework for this specific parcel and any potential rezoning in its future. 695 Grand Avenue is located in the State Historic Hill District. The block is also surrounded by the local Heritage Preservation District of the same name. I appreciate Ms. Sigworth bringing that up today. It was not stated in the staff report, but I believe it's important context. The proposed zoning classification is not reflective of the historic nature of the built environment in St. Paul. The intent of the T3 zoning district, and I quote from the code, provides for higher density pedestrian and transit-oriented mixed-use development. It is designed for development or redevelopment on land on sites large enough to support A, a mix of uses, B, a mix of housing styles, and I'm paraphrasing for time, C, a system of interconnected streets and paths that offer multiple routes for motorists, pedestrians, and bicyclists and are connected to existing and future streets, and a system of open space resources and amenities, etc. The T3 district is also intended for smaller sites in an existing mixed-use neighborhood center where some of the above elements already exist, or in an area identified in the comprehensive plan as a potential urban village site. The above elements may be found within the T3 district or adjacent to it. The intent is that all would be present within a reasonable walking distance. However, this portion of Grand Avenue is not identified as a potential urban village site in the 2040 comp plan. And while the Metropolitan Council offers Route 63 with 15-minute headways, as in a bus every 15 minutes, during rush hour on weekdays, Route 63 is not part of the Transit Authority's high-frequency network. Therefore, this type of zoning in this part of the city is not in keeping with land use policy LU1, encourage transit supportive density and direct most of the growth to areas with the highest existing or planned transit capacity. It is easy to say if you create enough density, Metro Transit will have to respond. However, that's not how justifying increased or changes in transit levels of service work. Many other factors, such as roadway width, potential turning radii, ridership by stop, and proximity to major job and/or housing centers all play into that decision, and it is one that Metro Transit does not take or make lightly. Further, this proposal calls for 99 structured parking spaces dedicated to the 80 rental units, which belies the theory that these residents or diners will be transit users. In cities subject to the Metropolitan Planning Act, like St. Paul, zoning directors must harmonize with and not contradict a city's comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is the document from which all other official controls of the city must, according to the Metropolitan Land Use Planning Act, flow. However, this zoning directive is in direct conflict with the city's 2040 comprehensive plan. Policy Land Use 29 states, ensure that building massing, height, scale, and design transition to those permitted in adjoining districts. This cannot be true for this site if it is rezoned to T3. The site will continue to be surrounded, even if temporarily, by an overlay district that restricts heights to 36 feet, and two zoning districts, B2 Community Business, which without the overlay restricts heights to 30 feet, with additional height permitted if it is set back farther than the first 30 feet on the lot. An RM2 medium density multiple family on 3 of the 4 sides, which permits 50 feet plus a conditional use permit to go higher were it not for the overlay. In fact, the overlay was partially established to ensure context sensitive design in and around an historic district based on design guidelines established by the creation of T districts in St. Paul. And in fact, those who worked on the now woefully out of date 2006 Summit Hill District 16 neighborhood plan established design standards at that time to meet those of the T2 district, a district whose intent is designed for use in existing or potential pedestrian and transit nodes. Its intent is to foster and support compact, pedestrian-oriented commercial and residential development that in turn can support and increase transit usage. It encourages but does not require a variety of uses and housing types, with careful attention to the amount and placement of parking and transitions to adjacent residential neighborhoods. If we are using a 2006 plan as our guidepost, and again, the 2006 Summit Hill Plan is one of only 2 official documents of record for land use planning in that planning district, and therefore all zoning must respond to it. In that plan, as stated in the staff report, these design standards reinforce human scale building characteristics, promote quality in architectural materials, reinforce a pedestrian-focused streetscape, promote underground parking for mixed-use developments, and visually screened surface parking for smaller, single-use developments, and promote signage that is consistent with building architecture and business function and complements the eclectic nature of the avenue. The folks who created that comprehensive planning guidance at the time could have used the T3 zoning language, but chose not to. And I would argue that it is because the potential scale of redevelopment in a T3 district is out of scale with the way the area has developed, out of scale with and not reflective of the historic districts that surround it, and that it is in and is out of scale with the root concept for zoning, promoting the public welfare. I believe that if this rezoning were granted, there would be a substantial increase in traffic in out of the site in an already congestive set of public streets, congested because the widths are such to meet the needs of a pre-automobile society. Increased safety hazards, particularly for children, people with disabilities, and the elderly, and perhaps most importantly, an adverse effect on consistent land use policies and practices. This proposal is inconsistent with the city's comprehensive plan, including policies in the land use chapter, the transportation chapter, the housing chapter, and the heritage preservation chapter, and is not in line with the stated goals of each chapter, nor the core values, community priorities, or focus areas identified during that planning process's robust and equitable community engagement effort. If we were to look at other concepts we consider when making zoning decisions, such as practical difficulties or an unnecessary or undue hardship under the existing zoning, I would not feel comfortable approving it because hardship/practical difficulty situations cannot be financial in nature, and that is the only concern I have been made aware of through developer and landowners' testimony. I fully believe that a reasonable solution may be had in rezoning this property to the T2 district with its identical design guidelines and more context-sensitive intent, density, and dimensional standards. In fact, the T2 district could allow for the desired 3.0 FAR with the already proposed structured parking. And in fact, given that the Summit Hill Association is rewriting its plan, perhaps a goal to rezone much of the Grand Avenue corridor to T2 would be a great benefit to all of us in St. Paul. I would agree with those in support of the project who spoke about needing more housing units, wanting to keep a long-standing small business owner and successful restaurant concepts in business, and therefore increasing the tax capacity of the city. However, based on the comments received by the commission, residents in the neighborhood are 4-1 against the proposed rezoning. And while I certainly cannot argue that the district council didn't do their due diligence in working with the developer and neighbors to make sure as many neighborhood residents got their say, I must say I'm a little baffled by the resulting decision. As a member of this decision-making body, I heard loud and clear the specific, fact-based effects of the proposal on the neighborhood. Public hearings are held because the Municipal Planning Act requires that all parties interested in application, including the applicant and neighbors, have the opportunity to speak and present their views on the application. While broad, general statements of opposition may not qualify as a reasonable finding of fact, specific statements made by the public that are concrete and factual in nature and relate to the public welfare do rise to the level of acceptable finding. Some of those concerns cited include concerns that the design isn't human-centered, concerns that the sight lines in and out of the structure are a potential danger to pedestrians, ice as a safety issue in the alley, the shadow effect on structures to the north, increased congestion on the public streets, one of which I believe is still one way, increased impervious surfaces, etc. And all of those concerns can be tied directly back to the density and dimensional standards for the T3 district, much of which can be mitigated by a rezoning to T2. And I'd like to thank the League of Minnesota Cities Zoning Guide for Cities, which is a must-read for citizen planners and honestly anyone in planning school, from which I borrowed heavily because reword something that is well stated. So thank you for your time and listening to my rationale for denial, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Commissioner Riley. Commissioner Tagieff, and then Commissioner McMurtry.
My goodness. Commissioner Riley, I appreciate the thoroughness and detail and I suppose logical basis on which you've advanced your argument. I sincerely appreciate it, and long may it continue. So I wanted to come back on a couple of things that were mentioned, obviously. So starting with this notion of a historic district, and while it is true that the site is surrounded by obviously Summit Avenue and some of the historic Victorians to the south, Grand Avenue itself has a mix of buildings. And this particular parcel has a former supermarket, a single-story supermarket, and a completely architecturally unremarkable building on the western half. And it has a surface parking lot on the right half currently. That to me is not a historic urban typology, it is a suburban typology which prioritizes automobile-based transit. So the current site is completely unhistoric in its construction and its design. The current parcel is completely unhistoric in its design. In fact, if you look at historic town centers, so I happen to be in Red Wing, Minnesota over the holiday weekend, you see this typology where buildings are kind of side by side along the street. There aren't these gaps for parking, and there is typically additional density at corners. So at corners, going to 3, 4, or even 5 stories is typical versus mid-block. So when I look at the plans submitted for this site and wanting to go down to this particular corner in this particular neighborhood, I would argue that a taller 3 to 4 story or 5-story building, which hugs the street and which provides retail along its entire frontage, is essentially more correct and more typical of a historic walkable urban streetcar neighborhood than a single-story building, and then a half-site suburban parking lot. Moving to the T3 definition, we heard terms, urban village, high frequency network, pedestrian, transit nodes. I do want to point out that when you look at the intent in the zoning code for T3, it says, we want to require development or redevelopment on land that is large enough to support a mix of uses, including residential and commercial and others, which this does. A mix of housing styles, types, and sizes to accommodate households of varying sizes, ages, and incomes. This building provides a housing style, in other words, an amenity building with larger rentable apartments, which does not currently exist in the neighborhood at all. One of the most compelling pieces of testimony we heard in favor of the building at district council level was that these larger apartments in an amenity building are very different to a lot of the historic walk-ups and smaller unit sizes that exist elsewhere in the neighborhood, but actually allow people to age in place and not have to leave the neighborhood when they moved out of when they downsized from the larger Victorian homes in the neighborhood. Section C says a system of interconnected streets and paths that offer multiple routes for motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists, which is obviously true. And the important part of the definition is after the bullets, it talks about the district also being intended for sites within existing mixed-use neighborhood centers where some of the above elements already exist. And it's hard to argue that Grand Avenue isn't an existing neighborhood center. The 2040 plan designates that entire portion of East Grand Avenue as a mixed-use corridor. So there is policy support for mixed-use development along this corridor. And the intersection with Grand Avenue and Victoria is merely 2 or 3 blocks to the west of this site. So that neighborhood node is right there. Similarly, when we talk about transit uses, the T3 district doesn't require necessarily that you have to direct development to nowhere except for a high frequency line, but it is right along a bus route. And when you discuss sort of the viability of walking, that our neighborhood has a very high walk score. It is a great example of a walkable historic streetcar neighborhood where it is possible to satisfy a large number of daily needs within a 10 to 15 minute walk. When it comes to the parking, obviously the no parking variance is requested. It is in line with code, but I will note that overall the parking is split. There are 68 spaces for residents. And actually, many of the complaints have centered around the idea that there is insufficient parking on the site, that if you build 68 spaces for about 80 units, then that is a ratio of less than 1 per unit. And that doesn't accord with the typical distribution of vehicles in St. Paul, which is 1.5 vehicles per household. So that actually supports the notion that that folks who live here will be expected to walk and cycle. There is also bike storage on site as well, significant bike storage, and obviously direct pedestrian connections to the street. So if you look at the building's design, it is very much that people will be expected to walk alongside using their cars. So I want to also sort of point out this notion of the consistency and inconsistency with the comp plan, and refer to the comp plan itself and the Summit Hill Neighborhood Plan. While the Summit Hill Neighborhood Plan does adopt the T2 district language in terms of the design standards, the difference between the T2 and T3 districts is minimal in some respects. So unlike a lot of different zoning classifications, T2 to T3 has the same maximum as FAR, the exact same list of uses, which is kind of key. And it has the same setbacks, a lot of the same intent. The real difference, if you really study the zoning code between T2 and T3, is height. And I mean, the design standards are, again, pretty identical. I think T3 adds one, but essentially, when the Summit Hill Association was attempting to come up with a plan that addressed the entirety of the neighborhood, it would be appropriate to base that plan on T2. It doesn't mean that T3 is unacceptable. The real difference is height. When you consider, lastly, the policy basis, so the 2006 plan for the Summit Hill versus the 2040 comprehensive plan, it's fair to say that there are policies in both plans that support either conclusion. So for example, policy G1 of the Summit Hill Neighborhood Plan in 2006 talks about corridor continuity. Maintain Grand Avenue as a continuous neighborhood retail and residential corridor, and contain commercial uses and accessory parking within existing boundaries. So G2, Streetscape Enhancement Plan, develop a Grand Avenue Streetscape Enhancement Plan to make Grand Avenue more pedestrian, shopper, and bicycle friendly. So G7, locally owned businesses. SHA recommends implementing mechanisms for supporting and retaining small locally owned businesses. And it's hard to argue that this proposal doesn't achieve some of those things either. And there are similar things about encouraging density and supporting commercial within the 2040 plans as well. Finally, I wanted to come back to a comment Commissioner Riley made about sort of applying the variance criteria to a rezoning, which is obviously not appropriate. The criteria for rezoning are different because it's a different process. Rezonings are legislative, whereas variance applications are quasi-judicial. So that probably explains the differences. And to refer back to St. Paul's zoning criteria, we look at the compatibility with land use and the zoning classification of property within the general area, suitability for uses permitted under the existing classification, trend of development, and consistency with the various plans. So applying those criteria, you can read Ms. Sigler's staff reports, but essentially the balance here was felt that this does overall merit a rezoning and supports the 2040 comprehensive plan and the District 16 Summit Hill Association comprehensive plan as well. So I will stop there. I think I've talked for quite a long time.
Commissioner McMurtry.
Thanks, Chair. I just have a really quick question. Knowing that there was such a substantial number of folks within the neighborhood who voiced their opposition to this project, I wanted to get a better sense of what those conversations have been with community members, and if there are any aspects of this plan that have been adjusted or added to address any of the concerns or ideas brought forward by community members.
The short answer is yes. There has been a lot of community dialogue between the developer and members of the district council, and I believe they did when they presented on Thursday, they actually had a list of the items that were changed based on community input. I remember that because at the end of it, I asked specifically why the scale and the size of the project was not something that they tried to redo based on the number of comments by community members. And what they had said was that it was just not feasible for them to go smaller and make the project work. I'll turn to Commissioner Baker or to Ms. Sigworth for any additional input on that.
Chair, yeah, I'm in agreement with what you said. They gave us a list of, I specifically asked what had been changed based on community input, and they provided a list of items that they changed based on hearing from the community. And there were changes when it comes to, as the chair just said, the overall scale size of the project. It started to get into a feasibility and, in my assumption, a costing issue on how to potentially make it smaller. But we did see, at least based on what they provided, information on changes made from community input.
Thank you.
Commissioner Grill.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Grill. I will try to make this brief. I think one of the things that was helpful for me to know when I was reviewing this is that the comments and the materials provided by the public, generally speaking, addressed both the case that's before us today and the case that would be before us next week. So comments on both the zoning and the variances were combined. And so the number is, I think, a little bit misleading when you're talking about the zoning specifically. A lot of those letters brought up specific elements that the zoning doesn't exactly touch on. And so I think that's just something to keep in mind. And there wasn't a number given to us for and against the zoning. And I think that's just partially because for staff, it was hard to tease out what each letter was strongly in favor or against. So I just think that's a good thing to note. And I just want to note my overall feelings towards the rezoning. I think we could have a lot of conversations around the overlay and around variances, and I think we probably will in the coming weeks. But I think when you get down to really the T3 zoning and when we're having that particular conversation, that I agree with Commissioner Tagiath, that I think this meets a lot of the land use goals of the city. I think when you look at the existing zoning and you look at the combination of business and RM, that a T project fits in, I think, very well here. And when Ms. Sigworth provided the image of the building sort of superimposed on the existing neighborhood, I don't think it's the behemoth that we're really having the conversation about. And when you look at the zoning regulations around those other buildings that are already there, but for the grand overlay, you are talking about things, for RM2, that's a 50-foot with the options for variance. So I think we really do get into the same size and scale when you're just talking about the zoning itself. And so that's why I voted in favor of it at the committee, and that's why I intend to vote in favor of it today.
Thank you, Commissioner Grow. I see Commissioner Tagiaff still has his hand up. I don't know if you would like to make another comment or if that's from his prior request to speak after Commissioner Riley.
I just wanted to thank you, Chair. I wanted to address the public comment piece of this and to talk a little bit about sort of what happened at District Council. So I will say that the public engagement process lasted almost 5 months. Multiple public meetings were held, first by the developer and then the Summit Hill Association. In terms of the sheer count of comments, it should be noted that 297 of the what have been called the letters in opposition were in fact signatures gathered in a petition. So certain folks in the neighborhood who are opposed to this project solicited approximately 300 of those letters in opposition. When this matter came before District Council, the comments we had received at the time, which were numbered 101, were divided up, and it was something like 55 to 58 for, 36, 37 against, and a balance of undecideds. Which is to say that sentiment in the neighborhood overall, if you were to simply divide this binary style, was certainly mixed. When you dive into those comments and read them in detail, as I have done and as our board has done, and when you listen to them repeatedly over several months, the themes which emerge aren't so binary. There are certainly a lot of concerns about scale, etc., but equally, very few people were opposed to redevelopment altogether. It was a question of, well, if this were a 4-story building, or if there was an affordable housing component. And so there's actually a stronger meeting of minds than might be suggested by the sheer counts. And I wanted the commission to be aware of that. And I would also point out that I think the letter submitted by the Summit Hill Association captures all of these issues really well and discusses them in detail and discusses the sort of trade-offs that were inherent in some of these decisions. So, the board looked very carefully at the concerns that had come in and what had been done to mitigate or address these concerns by the developer. For example, one of the chief initial concerns that came up was related to traffic and circulation and whether the site would be overwhelmed. The initial plan was to put the garage access for 80 residents plus the commercial loading on the alley. The commercial loading is on the alley today. And as a result of the engagement process, the developer spoke with the city. They moved their commercial loading directly onto Grand Avenue, which was seen as the best resolution for everybody. And also the garage access was moved so that some the residential folks would enter and leave via St. Albans Street, and that was developed over a process involving the community and traffic, public works, and PED. So just to note that the focus of the board throughout has been to listen, to address these concerns, and to secure real and tangible site plan changes in response to them, which I feel has been done. Obviously, there are, if you view this as simply a matter of height, the developer has not gone from 5 stories to 4 stories, which is probably the underlying desire of a lot of folks to remain in opposition. But to say that, I mean, I would echo the comments of my colleagues to say that significant changes to the site plan have been made. And when I've sat in zoning committee recently and looked at other cases we've considered, that certainly hasn't been the case. So I'm reminded of, I think, 520 Payne Avenue, when the developer came and said they conducted a 2-year public engagement process. I asked whether any tangible site plan changes had been made as a result, and the answer was no, they hadn't. And I would highlight that this process has been very, very different, even though not everybody is pleased that that the SHA didn't simply support their exact desires and exact version of how they would like to see it for that part of the neighborhood.
Commissioner Riley.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, I do want to identify that I think it's disingenuous to suggest that the rezoning can be substantially separated from the other items that we have not heard yet, because the founding rationale for a zoning district is to set density and dimensional standards. And that is the chief sort of reason for zoning districts primarily. The second one is use, which is why you see more diversity or more consistency in uses between zoning districts, and less or more significant differences between the density and massing portion of the zoning district definitions, etc. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear to my colleagues on the Planning Commission, and that this decision is different because it goes with the property and has nothing to do necessarily with the building itself, whereas the other ones are directly associated with the building. And I just want to make sure that we are at least all on the same page there. Thank you.
Commissioner Baker.
All right. Thanks, Chair. As my colleagues can see, this was a very interesting case. And there was a lot of nuance in it, but hopefully this was, hopefully you have enough information to make a solid vote today.
Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Baker. Are there any additional comments or questions from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, I have one for Ms. Sickworth. Commissioner Underwood. Commissioner Underwood. Commissioner Underwood is indicating that she can't unmute. So while she tries to figure, she's just saying thank you for the hard work, and that she will be voting in favor today. Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Underwood. Just a question for Ms. Sickworth. In terms of the staff recommendation and then the committee vote in favor of rezoning to T3 but not on the overlay, I'm just wondering if you could just summarize what the distinction was between allowing one but not the other, just really briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Rangel Morales. So the major distinction was that rezoning to outside of the East Grand Overlay District was the policy in the Summit Hill District 16 plan about adopting the overlay district and which includes the height limits. And so we thought that because of that policy being in that plan, it was not consistent with that plan, and therefore that was not consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Just a follow-up question. When, how does the city differentiate between, so in other words, just not consider the overlay when determining whether or not a rezoning is appropriate? I mean, isn't that sort of like the guiding principle for that area of what is and is not an appropriate rezoning?
Yes, that's why we take it into consideration, and it's a complicated thing because we still have our underlying zoning, but then this goes on top of it, and because it's more restrictive, it does it is the one that carries forward. So I'm sorry, can you clarify your question a little bit more, maybe?
Sure. I mean, my question is just, I found it conflicting to say that we should allow T3 zoning as if this overlay district didn't exist, but the overlay district does exist. And so then the counterpart to that is we approve the T3 based on the regular zoning, but under the overlay, it's denied. And I'm just thinking in terms of that's the entire purpose of the overlay is to be more restrictive. And I understand that they're currently rewriting it, and perhaps the revisions of it will allow for this type of zoning. But if staff is recommending not to allow for the overlay, I find it conflicting to say that it is allowed under the traditional zoning requirements as if there was no overlay. And so I'm just wondering, like, the thought process in the city or your recommendation that said, well, if there wasn't an overlay, yeah, this type of zoning would be allowed, but let's approve it for T3 under that concept. But because there is an overlay, we can't approve it under the overlay portion.
Yes, I do understand there's an issue here, and that is why there are kind of two paths to essentially getting out of the overlay district, and one is rezoning to outside of the overlay district, and that we found to be not consistent with the plan. And then the other way is to get out of it with variances, and this is what the Summit Hill Association recommended. And so that is the other path that the applicant is taking, and that will be at zoning committee next week. And so through that, they have to prove that the variance is in harmony with the general purposes and intent of zoning code. The variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan. The applicant has established that there are practical difficulties in complying with the provision. Economic considerations alone do not constitute practical difficulties. The plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property and not created by the landowner. The variance will not permit any use that is not allowed in the zoning district where the affected land is located, and the variance will not affect will not alter the essential character of the surrounding area. So in order to get those variances to be out, to not have the restrictions of the East Grand Overlay District, they have to this has to be shown. And it gets even more complicated because there's also the variances consistent with the comprehensive plan. So so this is tough, but yes, there are two paths of getting out of the East Grand Overlay District, and then they're kind of going both routes in case the rezoning doesn't work out.
And I see I might have opened another Pandora's box here with comments, but could you just really quickly answer where the next closest rezoning T3 is located to this site? Would it be like on Selby and Dale, or?
I can pull up a map right here and find out for you.
While you look that up, Ms. Sigworth, I'll go ahead and turn to Commissioner Baker and then to Commissioner Kantner. Feel free to interrupt in between people's comments.
I'm sorry, I think that was up, Chair, from an earlier request.
Okay, Commissioner Kantner and then Commissioner Riley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just had a question about kind of to this conversation, what the standard is for bringing a parcel out of an overlay district. Would that be the same standard basically as rezoning? Just kind of, and like how often is it that we bring a certain parcel out of an overlay district? I don't know if staff can maybe answer that.
Ms. Sigworth?
Yes, thank you for that question. So rezoning out of the East Grand Overlay District is done just as any other rezoning is, going through this process with the Planning Commission and then going to City Council. And it's a zoning code amendment. And yes, it does not happen often. I couldn't find any examples of rezoning out of an overlay district, but there are several examples of variances to overlay districts. And it hasn't been for the East Grand Overlay District, but some of our assigned districts, people make variances to that. There were variances to the there was a Shepherd Davern Overlay District. And there were variances to that because that required, I think, 2 acres on a site that would be able to be developed. So people do make variances, and to overlay districts, they happen. But yes, this is a kind of a different route that hasn't been taken before. But there also are not overlay districts that are as restrictive as the East Grand Overlay District.
Commissioner Riley and then Commissioner Grill.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question for staff, which is if they could share the rationale for T3 in the overlay district plus a series of variances versus T2, which versus T2. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Riley. And just quickly, yeah, the nearest T3 zoning district is at Dale and Selby. So that's just a few blocks north. And so the applicant originally had talked about rezoning to T2, but that has height restrictions of 35 feet. And in order to make their building work, they had thought that a greater height was needed, and that kind of bumped it up into the T3 zoning district, which permits heights at 55 feet. So they were already at that height. And in terms of variances, you know, it comes down to the criteria that I said earlier, and the fact that the overlay district is in the Summit Hill District Plan, and they won't be making any changes to that for at least a year. The Summit Hill Association has decided. They said in the recommendation that they would have a position on the overlay district in next June, I believe. So this is another route is through the variances, and so the applicant is going that route, and we are analyzing to provide that recommendation to you.
I have a quick follow-up, if I might, Chair.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Can you tell me, Ms. Sigworth, what the maximum height allowable with a conditional use permit in T2 is?
Yes, hold on 1 second. So it is, it's 35 feet by right. And then let me scroll down here. A maximum height of 45 feet may be permitted with a conditional use permit for T2.
Thank you.
Commissioner Grill?
This is Commissioner Grell. I'll give back my time.
Okay. Commissioner Tagia?
Thank you, Chair. And again, I know I'm taking a lot of air in this conversation. I wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to come into some of the thinking about the difference between T3 and East Grand Avenue overlay. We live with it every day. One of the things I wanted to note is that this conflict of districts is a normal condition for our neighborhood. There is a variety of underlying zoning along Grand Avenue, and the East Grand Avenue overlay comes in on top of that and says, well, regardless of this, we're going to impose certain further restrictions. So you can be zoned RM2 and have a residential use, or you can be zoned T2, or you can be zoned B2, and then the overlay district kind of comes on top of that. So that's something that's very normal, and I think it's really helpful to look at this as two separate questions and say, well, is T3 zoning suitable for this particular site? Its uses, its setbacks, its dimensional standards, all the things that make up T3, is that correct? And the staff report and zoning district council said it was, but when you look at the East Grand Avenue overlay district, Ms. Sigworth mentioned two routes out of it. One is rezoning, and one is variances. One of the reasons I agree with the staff recommendation is that when you rezone out of a district, you have to look and say, well, is taking a chunk out of the East Grand Avenue overlay district consistent with the legislative intent of that district? And it seems impossible to make that case, right? So the legislative intent of that district is extremely clear. It's to define a narrow commercial corridor literally along two sides of one street for 11 blocks. And so when you zone out of the district, it's really saying these rules no longer apply to me. And to my mind, that fatally undermines the legislative intent of the district, which is not only in the 2006 comprehensive plan as a visionary statement, but it was adopted as an official control. The virtue of the variance route is that variances are specific to the building, and also the developer is forced to prove that they can conform to the underlying spirit or legislative intent of the district while exceeding certain technical limits. So that's certainly to me, and I think to the board, is an important distinction, and is why I think the board and felt far more comfortable with the idea of pursuing the variance route, because it forces the developer to say, well, we can limit spillovers, or we can achieve all the things the overlay district was intended to achieve, while staying true to its spirit.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Tagia. And I think that's sort of the conflict that I'm having, is the portion where we're not considering the variance request in addition to the rezoning almost simultaneously. Because I tend to agree with Commissioner Riley that when you just look at this site in isolation, it is not in a major transit corridor. In terms of, the nearest T3 zoning is, as Ms. Sigworth just confirmed, in the Selby Dale area, which it's close, but it's not immediately next to or immediately nearby. And so it just doesn't seem like T3 in this particular zone actually makes sense to me. But that's just to me. And I agree that if you were to take the variances, perhaps that becomes less true, but we're not just considering, for me, not considering the variances, it seems like to other commissioners, made it easier to just vote that this is an appropriate rezoning. But to me, because staff is saying, yes, it meets the T3 in the rest of the city, but no, it doesn't meet the overlay district, it sort of does undermine in and of itself, without considering the variances, the overlay district. Now, whether or not I agree with the overlay district is a different question, but the city took time and expense to put this thing in place, and the rezoning in and of itself, in my opinion, does undermine the overlay district. And if we have to consider the variances, which we're not, in order to get to a rezoning, then I think that's a problem. Commissioner Baker?
Thanks, Chair. Just listening to your comments, maybe staff needs to weigh in, but the crux of your comment is that, from my understanding, and I just want to be clear for people that are about to vote, that comment potentially says that what we are about to vote on should not happen this way, and that they should be together. And my question, I guess, to staff is, this is currently the act. They have been separated. So you have a rezoning, and then next week or potentially next week you would have CUP variances. We're getting down to saying, and I'm hearing different comments, but ultimately that both acts should be together, so you think about them as one. And we as the zoning committee were told, and I specifically kind of instructed all of us to not do that, to specifically divide them out. So my question to staff before this vote is, how do you, if there is a concern, is there a way to pull these together? And I'm not advocating for it. I just want to be clear before we vote, because I feel like there is now concern about our ability to vote on them separately.
Thank you for those comments, Commissioner Baker. And I'll turn it over to staff, and that is part of my concern. However, I do think it's possible to differentiate between the rezoning and the variances. I think that the two matters can be handled separately. For the way that I thought about it, though, is it's hard for me to get to this is appropriate on this overlay district without considering the reasons that Commissioner Tagioff was. So it may be possible that I turn into a yes if I was to start considering the variances and how it all shapes into the area and whether it follows the spirit of the overlay district, as Commissioner Tagioff was commenting. But because we're being asked to separate it, I don't think that the rezoning in and of itself would apply. So Ms. Sigworth, could you comment on Commissioner Baker's, and I don't know if my clarification made sense or helped in any way, but I'll turn it over to Ms. Sigworth.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So these can be, this could be pushed over to make a decision with the variances in the conditional use permit. But also rezonings do happen before buildings are even thought of or plans are made. So they can be thought of as separately, but I just need to look at the deadline, the 60-day deadline that we have, and rezonings, they also do have to go to City Council for final decision, and everything is kind of based on this rezoning. So that's why it kind of made sense to get this process started before the variances in the CUP. That's a final decision at Planning Commission unless it's appealed. So that was the rationale that the rezoning is all kind of, or the CUP and the variances are all kind of based on if this gets rezoned. But if you guys would like to wait on the vote for this decision, although it still does go to City Council, that is a possibility.
Commissioner Kantner?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's actually important that we keep these two issues separate. I think Ms. Sigworth and others have touched on the fact that the zoning runs with the land, whereas the variances run with the building. And I think, as Commissioner Riley said, the standard for rezoning, I did look up that League of Minnesota Cities document, but now I've lost it, is something like whether it makes no sense, the current zoning makes no sense. And I think in this case, B2 does not make sense. I mean, as we look at corridors around the city, we're rezoning them for T districts because because they're better for pedestrians and because we want these sort of mixed use developments. And so I think there is an argument, regardless of what development is going in, that B2 no longer makes sense for this location. And just in terms of how that interacts with the overlay district, I think, one thing we might be missing in the conversation is right now with B2, they're in a more restrictive zone than the overlay district. If they would go up to T3, the most restrictive would be the overlay district. I don't know if that was clear when what I just said, but I think it does kind of raise the base level of what they would need variances for, and I think it makes sense to kind of keep these two issues separate.
Commissioner Cantor, does that document say anything? You mentioned what it currently is zoned, but does it say anything about what is being proposed to be rezoned to? Well, if you have the document up.
It doesn't, but I think in this case, staff can't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but staff can't just say, I think it'd be more appropriate for this to be T2, because that's not what's being proposed by the applicant, and the applicant is the one kind of driving this rezoning process. Whereas if we were looking at a full rezoning for the corridor, maybe staff could say, oh, T2 would be more appropriate.
Commissioner Baker and then Commissioner Riley, and then I think we can close discussion and take a vote on this.
Again, apologize. I kept my hand up. I have nothing else to say.
Okay. Commissioner Riley? Commissioner Riley, is there something you would like to say?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I agree with, I want to thank Commissioner Kantner for what she said, and I do want to note with the rezoning, again, it goes with the property. And so despite, and I think it is appropriate that we take them separately as we are, for me, the issue still hinges on the type of structure that can be built on T3 versus T2. And that's, to me, what is the major difference here, regardless of what happens with the actual structure itself down the road. It's what is possible, not what is probable or proposed or likely at this time. Thank you.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and close discussion. I want to thank everybody for your comments and taking the time to review this. It certainly was it took a lot of time during zoning committee, and we had anticipated that it was going to take a lot of time today. So thank you, everybody, for your comments. So the motion coming out of committee is to rezone from B2 Community Business District and EG East Grand Avenue Overlay District to T3 Traditional Neighborhood without the East Grand Overlay District. And I believe it's the motion coming out of committee was to approve the T3 but to deny the East Grand Overlay District. So Sonia, could we please get a roll call on this?
Okay, Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Baker,
Yes.
Commissioner DeJoy,
Yes.
Commissioner Grill,
Yes.
Commissioner Hood,
Yes.
Commissioner McMurtry,
Yes.
Commissioner Said,
Yes.
Commissioner Presley,
Yes.
Commissioner Risberg,
Yes.
Commissioner Underwood. Oh, okay, gotcha. Thank you. Commissioner Riley,
No.
Commissioner Taggia,
Yes.
Commissioner Yang, Commissioner Holst,
Yes.
Commissioner Kantner,
Yes.
Commissioner Mitchell,
Yes.
Commissioner Moore,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
17-1.
Sonia, and I think because it is legislative, I get to vote on this, and I would vote no, so it would be 17-2. So that motion is approved. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is an informational update from the Reconnect Rondo, update by Mr. Keith Baker, Executive Director, Marvin Anderson, Board Chair of both Reconnect Rondo. Is Mr. Baker and Mr. Anderson present? Are Mr. Baker?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chair Morales. I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of the presentation, specifically to share an update. I'm going to see if we can get the technology working, and I'm hoping that people are able to see the presentation currently.
We can. And just because I don't, oh, Mr. Baker. First, thank you so much for waiting and for being patient while we had that last discussion. But the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Chair Morales and commissioners. I'd like to, at this particular point, turn it over to Mr. Marvin Anderson, who is the board chair for Reconnect Rondo.
Good morning. I want to make sure that I can be heard. Can everybody hear me?
We can, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And thank you for that acknowledgement. As a former member of the Planning Commission, I can truly appreciate the idea that, wow, I don't think I could go through another session of the Planning Commission right now. That was a very extraordinary conversation, and I enjoyed it, and it brought back many memories to me. And thank you again for allowing us to come and bring you an update to the St. Paul Planning Commission. I am Marvin Anderson, as Mr. Baker indicated, and I chair the board of Reconnect Rondo. I'm a co-founder of the Rondo Day Festival, and I serve as the executive director of the Rondo Commemorative Plaza and the Rondo Center of Diverse Expression. We want to be sure that everyone knows the pedigree, in a sense, of the members of our board. Mary Kay Boyd, a former educator, is a descendant of Rondo. Nick Kalik, a former St. Paul firefighter and president of the NAACP in St. Paul for many years, is a descendant and a resident of Rondo. Phil Terrell is one of our new young people. He's with an exec with Microsoft. His father is Tyrone Terrell, who worked for several years with the city of St. Paul. Keith Allen is a former resident with Health East. Noel Nix, as was mentioned earlier, is on our board, as is Matt Hill, who is Commissioner Tony Carter's aide. April Lucas is a descendant. Adrian Perriman is a Rondo resident. Margaret Lovejoy is a descendant and a Rondo resident. And D'Angelo Savinskin is a current resident of Rondo. So we have a nice mixture of old and new, young and brilliant young people, some elders like myself, who want to bring to this effort a sense of history, but also an anticipation that will come from the future, and our young board members bring that. We are a 501c3, and we want to right past wrongs and end systematic oppression, and we are involved in the healing of Rondo. And that's real important. We just look at the loss, 700 homes and businesses, home ownership. The population loss was 61%. The intergenerational wealth loss was $35 million in 1980. There's a wealth gap now of about 157 unrealized equity value in the homes that were lost. If those homes were still in Rondo, their total value would be $157 million. Our pathway to healing began with Rondo Days that I had the honor to co-found. The idea for a freeway cap grew out of some discussions in 2009. In 2015, formal apologies were made to the Rondo community by the mayor of the city of St. Paul and Charlie Zelli, the commissioner of transportation. Out of that, the Commemorative Plaza was born, and then Reconnect Rondo was launched in 2017. And since that time, we've been building the case. We've had a Rondo Land Bridge Feasibility Study. We've had the Past Prosperity Study. That's where those figures came from. We've had a study of gentrification that was done by a brilliant student from McAllister College. We've had a health impact assessment that was coordinated with the St. Paul Ramsey County Public Health and Wilder Foundation. Very quickly, our timeline began in 2016 with that Healthy Communities Initiative. We've had block parties where we've tried to survey the community. We did the health assessment in 2017. 2018, we did the Urban Land Institute Advisory Panel with about 125 interviews. We did a learning, listening, and leveraging report in 2018. And we've had the new executive director brought on board, Keith Baker. And since Keith has been on, I want to say, as the chair of the board of directors, we couldn't be more pleased with his performance, more pleased with the way in which he has brought his considerable skills of organizing and having worked in MnDOT for 18 years to the fore. He has assembled a crack team of advisors right now, but he is going to lead us into the next direction where we can go now that we've received this appropriation from the state of Minnesota. Keith, I want to introduce you to this group, and I give you the microphone so you can continue this presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson, Chair Morales, and members of the commission. As Mr. Anderson has mentioned, I spent 18 years with the Department of Transportation, and I've served in a couple capacities. One, early on, the recruitment of candidates for the highway maintenance training program back in the latter part of the 90s. And I can also say that members of the Rondo community were part of the effort to ensure that the workforce within MnDOT really became more diverse. The second responsibility was the oversight of compliance of construction administration. Really the monitoring of compliance, the federal rules and state rules. And then third, and prior to my leaving MnDOT in 2015, I was responsible for the consultant contracting, which really entailed the hiring of all engineering and consultant firms, all professional technical activities, a joint powers agreement, jurisdictional relationships, etc. So as Mr. Anderson has mentioned, I really understand intimately the Department of Transportation and the intersection relationships between the organizations, jurisdictions, and also some of the matters that really emerge in terms of trying to ensure that the community has a better understanding as well. So let me get to the mission of the organization, and we've really had quite a long journey to really make sure that we're clear about this proposition. I think as Director Pereira had mentioned earlier, we have not been before the Planning Commission for a couple of years, and so we're really excited because I think what will be illustrated here is a refined and clearer sense of what this proposition is about. So we're leading a restorative movement to revitalize the Rondo community with an asset or a structure, a blank canvas, to reignite a vibrant African-American cultural enterprise district that Mr. Anderson has highlighted has been lost or greatly impacted. But to do this, it requires a wide range of individuals and stakeholders, from legislative leaders as well as community-based organizations and the community, in order to kind of move forward in a way that is beneficial and helpful to supporting the quality of life for residents, not only Rondo proper, but also the city of St. Paul, the region, and the state. As Mr. Anderson had mentioned, we had the feasibility study. That feasibility study was really driven by 5 primary goals: neighborhood connections, housing affordability, equitable development, public health and green space, and community leadership. And as part of community leadership, the lens was it must be led by African Americans. Second portion of it, it must ensure that ownership emerges so that the return for whatever investment is situated for this proposition is somehow able to bring return to communities and to build that equity. Well, there were 7 concepts that were put on the table early on. From that, we whittled down a particular proposition that resulted in identifying 32 linear feet that met all 5 of the feasibility goals. The other ideas or concepts that came forward were met 3 of 5, but this was the proposition that was able to give us a full complement of what we thought could bring return back and build a sense of prosperity for the community. We have a blank canvas, and the big idea is to replace land. Currently, it is space. The big idea is to celebrate the diversity within the community itself, and the big idea is to be forward-thinking and to establish what can be put in place to bring about greater prosperity and benefit to those even beyond 30 or 50 years from where we are here today. That blank canvas has the potential of having play space, housing, educational institutions, a way in which we focus and lean in on renewable energy opportunities, retail and marketplace for potential descendants and or others, really taking a look at urban gardening, space for the Rondo Day celebration is just one other illustration. But it's also to ensure that we're able to celebrate as one of the 7 cultural destination areas identified by the city of St. Paul. And so we believe that we're right in the sweet spot of hoping that we can support the city's outcome in that regard. So what's the initial breakdown of what we're dealing with here? And I know a lot of people have heard a lot of information about the funding, and we were so pleased. The proposition really brings about $6.2 million. And this is the breakout of the application of those resources: community planning and engagement, assessment and analysis, environmental stuff, master planning, a way in which we can amplify and resource the current community stakeholder ecosystem, and really a focus in on anti-displacement and restorative development modeling. This is a restorative movement, and one that can bring about restoration of an area in a very comprehensive way, in a very holistic way. Certainly, we put forward as part of the feasibility study an analysis of cost. Again, this is a high-level breakdown of the future phases. Again, the bridge and structure itself, the development on top, as well as the design and engineering. We're a bit out from that phase 2 and 3, but it's important for you to see kind of the full picture of our thinking and a full idea of the application of the resources that we've been successful enough to be able to gather from the legislature. So what does it mean in the way of opportunities? New housing, upwards of 576 units. Job creation, it can be tremendous, not only in terms of the structure itself and the building of construction companies, particularly African-American construction companies, but BIPOC construction companies. That's 900 new jobs. It also brings about upwards of 400 permanent jobs. So a total of 1,800 in this proposition can emerge. Certainly the retail and office space, nonprofit and institutional space in total has the potential of being 140,000 square feet. And without question, we have to recognize the increased revenue potential for the city itself and potential growth that is projected. But this is not a new proposition. Land bridges are something that we can find across the country. We know in my former hometown of Duluth, there's a land bridge on 35W as you're heading up towards the North Shore. It's currently a park space, and in fact, most, if not all, bridges throughout the country are parks. There are a couple of examples where there is retail or commercial space, but nowhere in the country is a proposition being put forward like Reconnect Rondo is proposing. But we know that public funding becomes very, very important. And we know that $348 million was invested of public funding with US Bank Stadium. And so we're not interested in doing anything other than that which has already been done, but to ensure that it's done and provides direct return for the community itself. I illustrate Target Field here as an example because Target Field is over a freeway itself currently. And so when we think about what is familiar, what precedence has already occurred, we recognize that this is something that can happen also. When we also consider the investment in these two propositions and others, oftentimes we have to ask ourselves, where's the direct line connection of benefit to a neighborhood? And so the investment that we're proposing and that we have proposed is to ensure that whatever the investment is in the public, that there is similar return, more direct return to neighborhoods and communities in this proposition. So with that, we know that we have a 4P proposition that we're brainstorming currently: public, private, philanthropy, and people. The people side becomes very, very important because this is restorative in nature and must bring return to communities. Community and neighborhood folks need to have mechanisms by which they can invest. That's part of generating wealth for community members, and the model that we're putting forward really should be something that takes the various streams and colors of money and makes that the transactions happen in an easy way, that we ensure that transparency, cooperation, and accountability exists, that we can establish in the public, private, philanthropic, and people space a common framework of measuring success, and that we're able to have various stakeholders at the table understanding expectations and an aim towards direct community benefit. Let's take a look at our milestones just for a moment, because we've been on quite a journey. This, as Mr. Anderson had indicated, began back in 2016 with Reconnect Rondo being formally launched in 2017. We've conducted a wide range of studies. We know that there's a path that MnDOT currently is engaged in that really falls along the same continuum. We're now in 2021, where we've requested the 6.2 million from the legislature. And we're moving forward at this particular point in various levels of partnership around the planning process. We can't anticipate knowing exactly when the construction will begin, nor the operations. We do know that we are trying to position this in a way that we're always staying ahead. This is a marathon, and we continue to push forward in identifying a more definitive schedule, and I'll get to that in a little bit as well. I wanted to really illustrate kind of the timeline of activities that Mr. Anderson began. Certainly we know in 2020, a year after I came on board, we were all hit with COVID, but we had ensured at least continual activities internally to really make sure that we were clear. So we took on a responsibility of being the administrative lead for a group of organizations called the Rondo Roundtable. It was originally established in 2015, and it was a way in which historically African-American organizations have come together to celebrate, exchange, leverage, support various activities that are going on throughout the community, particularly those led by African-Americans. And so we took that administrative lead to ensure that we were harnessing the best and coordinating more effectively as we looked at creating one of the 7 destination areas as identified by the city. We had a brand refresh, which really allowed us to sharpen our organizational vision and mission and really establish a clearer strategic direction. We had a tiger by the tail, and I think in our earlier years, we weren't quite clear or sure what that really looked like. And I think today, as you can see by the presentation, we have a clearer sense of what this is about. While people want to focus, and it's easy to focus in on a structure and a land bridge, we are creating a cultural enterprise district that's connected to an infrastructure project. And in order to have this cultural district emerge, we must have a blank canvas. And that's why I think the attention focuses in on the land bridge itself. We've had a steep trajectory. I just want to highlight a couple of things. Certainly in early part of the year, we testified before the Minnesota House Transportation Committee. That was when the trajectory of activity around media, we've been in the media cycle for the last 6 consecutive months. We put forward 2 bills. One, again, we were successful. The other was a bonding bill that really was intended simply to set the stage for bond request in 2022. It may be pushed to 2024. As we begin to go through the process of planning, we'll have a better idea of what the timing of that might be. The other thing that I think is important is as we begin to have conversations at the congressional level, at the national level, we work closely with the City of St. Paul, the Department of Transportation, and others, and put forward to our congressional leadership, Representative McCollum, Representative Smith, Tina Smith, submissions for transportation and infrastructure resources and economic and development initiative resources. And to date, we have been successful not only at the local legislature with 6.2, but we have also been informed that our proposal is also meeting with great enthusiasm, and have recently had congressional passing at the House of $5.2 million to help support, again, many of the things that I've already previously identified. In terms of community engagement activity, in April, we forwarded out about 9,000 postcards to invite folks to participate in May activities, 1-hour Zoom sessions to kind of get updated, because we needed to reintroduce ourselves, cumulatively having 120 folks participating, June 2nd through June 3rd. We had community benefits workshops, and these were a commitment of 40 people over a 2-day period. 4 hours of commitment looking at housing affordability, community cultural district and neighborhood connections, health and well-being and community amenities, and finally economic development and restorative modeling itself. And then recently in June, the 4P modeling exploration. Again, this was building up, getting community voice in hopes that we were able to create input and have a model, at least ideas of a model established where we could ensure that return of benefit gets to community. I'm going to also say that recently, July 7th, we held a Let's Build Together conversation, an AM and a PM. And with that, 22 participants and a conversation with participants that were 58. And again, it's really trying to expand and ensure that people are informed of where we are at the process, in this process, and we look forward to continuing to do that. With that, there are 5 basic areas that help us to forge forward, establishing our team, growing our capacity, ensuring that we're creating strategic lift to our process. I've already mentioned active master planning and putting together a mechanism and a team to move forward with that in partnership with certainly the jurisdictional partners, but our community ecosystem. We really have to continue our increasing of awareness within our community, confirm partnerships, and really be aware of and keep in the forefront what we believe the impacts might be, because there is a sufficient concern around certainly displacement and gentrification and other things, and so we'll be focused on moving forward on that. I'll simply say that over the next 60 to 180 days, and again, this is our preliminary framework, we'll be again building our own internal capacity, bringing on board a community engagement specialist as an example, an associate director, because you can imagine 1.5 FTEs driving this cannot move it forward in a way that's really going to be helpful. We believe that it's going to be important that we put in place program management services, and so we've been exploring that already. An advisory team of folks, what we identify as idea and solution task forces. That would really mean 5 to 7 topic areas, co-chaired with 5 to 7 community and/or organizational members serving, with a particular emphasis on the recent LCDA grant that we've been fortunate enough to work in partnership with the city to receive, really creating anti-displacement review and analysis to ensure that we create an innovation overlay district. As an example, housing ideas and solution team being one of the 5 to 7 topic areas. And that's a way in which we see community input also being a part of the process. Establishing our project management team. Certainly we have the jurisdictional partners, and we have been cultivating and working with each of the jurisdictions along the way. Certainly we have our technical advisory team that's been heavily involved, and so we'll be formulating that as well. Looking at developing a project schedule, recognizing we have a couple of different layers. There's the master planning process. There's the transportation planning and schedule process. There's the development that goes on top of the structure, if that were to occur, as well as community programming. And so we're looking forward to establishing those deeper conversations in the next period of time as indicated above. And then formalizing the partnership. I did indicate the Rondo Roundtable. The Rondo Roundtable is preparing currently to sign memorandum of understanding between those historical organizations, and we'll be moving forward to continue to build that. I had also indicated amplifying and resourcing the community ecosystem because we recognize that Reconnect Rondo does not provide the direct service. But we know we have an ecosystem that does that, whether we're talking about economic development, job creations, housing affordability, and other areas. And so we're looking forward to amplifying that work and resourcing that work moving forward through partnership. I'll just quickly go through a couple of other areas. Certainly establishing the master planning team, really framing restorative development and what that means in terms of a circular economy as an example. Really ensuring that we're putting forward a regenerative kind of urban development framework, as well as smart city technology, and seeing how that might translate into direct benefits to community members as well. Our community engagement RFPs will begin to go out here shortly as well. And that is an invitation to community organizations to help us with this effort. Next step, again, the 4P financing mechanism, really taking a look at impact studies moving forward, establishing a fund development team, and identifying potential anchors that might have interest. It could be an educational institution, could be a public institution such as a library, etc. Who are the current stakeholders that we have? Well, I want to really emphasize that it takes all of the elements in order to move this proposition forward. And so the resources that we received are going to help us move forward in a more exponential way and clearer way. So we have a board of directors. I had mentioned establishment of the project management team, the technical advisory team we have in place, the jurisdictional organizations are tied in, the funding community, which has supported us to this particular point, and we're very pleased for that support and helping us to get to where we are today. I've mentioned the community ecosystem and the stakeholders that exist. We have pro bono services that are looking at land use issues with us. Dorsey Whitney is serving as that role, and I've mentioned the Rondo Roundtable. But the idea and solution teams or task forces is something that currently we'll be moving forward with to build. And we believe very, very fundamentally that a youth council must be established as well. Those will be integrated into the diagram that are here. It's work to be put forward moving forward. So at this particular point in time, certainly want to field whatever questions that people might have. Appreciate the opportunity so much to present this. And Mr. Anderson, do you have any comments for closing?
No, I just want to thank you. I want to thank the St. Paul Planning Commission for their attention. And I know we want to just emphasize, should you wish to come and see where we are, where the Lamberts is, if you want to take a tour and and see where we are physically, just contact the Reconnect Rondo office at any time. We'd be happy to take you around and show you just where the potential land bridge can go, and to visit the Rondo Commemorative Plaza and to learn more about the Rondo community. Thank you again for your time and your attention.
Mr. Anderson and Mr. Baker, I do see some people have questions if you would have time.
Let me see if I can get to the chat. I'm not as nimble.
They're from commissioners, so I think they would ask them over.
Okay.
Oh, please. Happy to field whatever questions. I'm not sure the protocol you want to move forward with.
So I'll call on Commissioner DeJoy and then Commissioner Presley. Commissioner DeJoy.
I'll make mine brief because mine is more of a comment than a question, but this presentation is inspiring. As the Planning Commission has followed this vision from the start, I see it really starting to take shape as a feasible master plan. So thank you, Mr. Baker, for virtually walking us through this plan. And a distinguished thank you to Mr. Marvin Anderson. Your tenacious commitment to this development is so important and will certainly be part of your impressive and valuable legacy in the city of St. Paul. So thank you for that. I'll cut it off there, and I look forward to, more presentations as this develops further.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Presley.
Mine too is just a comment. I've been involved in more ways than one with since the inception of this idea, this concept, and I am a descendant of Rondo, so I know about the pain and the loss, wealth, and the historical and generational wealth that I-94 caused in the Rondo community where I lived and grew up in. I also, too, just quickly want to commend all the work of Reconnect Rondo. Have been involved in a lot of the community engagement pieces. I am currently consulting and working with the Rondo Roundtable to get it back up and organized and really connecting to this work. And as a descendant, I see a chance for healing for our community. I see a chance for really preserving the historic importance of the Rondo community, the whole restoration also, and really addressing the injury and the disrespect to Black people that lived and worked in the Rondo community. So I am disclosing that I have a very self-interest in this project being successful, and thank you to my fellow commissioners for allowing time to bring you up to speed. That's it.
Any additional questions for Mr. Baker or Mr. Anderson? Commissioner Said? Oh, no. Commissioner Said?
I think Commissioner DeJoy first, I think.
Oh, Commissioner DeJoy? No, I think she put her hand down. Commissioner Said?
Thank you, Chair. This is Commissioner Sayed. I want to thank Mr. Anderson and Baker for bringing this. And I am a Rondo neighbor, and I live almost over 20 years there. But I want to thank you for doing this work, and I look forward to see this and to my neighbor. Thank you.
All right, with that, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Baker, I think I want to thank you for taking the time to provide us with an update. As Commissioner DeJoy said, we have heard from you from the very beginning, and it is really inspiring to see the project develop as it has. So we wish you the best of luck and look for future presentations from you and updates on the progress that you've made on the Reconnect Rondo project.
Thank you, Chair Morales, and appreciate the opportunity to present, and we'll look forward to updating you as things progress.
Thank you, sir. So we'll move on to the, excuse me. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And I believe that would be, bring up the agenda here. The Comprehensive Neighborhood Planning Committee, Commissioner Grill. Commissioner Grill.
Chair, I can't hear. It looks like she may be trying to speak with the
Yeah,
microphone
I
blinking on
see.
and off.
Yeah, clicking on and off.
I don't know.
So I'll just go ahead and Ms. Mohan.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Okay, great. So the comp plan has no upcoming meetings scheduled. We were going to meet on the homeless services study, and that's been delayed a bit. So there was no meeting last week, and nothing is on the agenda for a couple weeks.
So the meeting, Ms. Mohan, for the special meeting for this upcoming Wednesday has been canceled.
Correct.
Okay. So moving on to the next item on the agenda is Transportation Committee, Commissioner Risberg.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, our meeting was rescheduled. The next one will be on Monday, July 26th at 4:30, and agenda is still to be determined. So that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Risberg. Moving on to communications and nominations, Commissioner Underwood.
Hello, no report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Underwood. And then moving on to Task Force Liaison Report, Commissioner DeJoy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I posted the website address for the updates of the Hillcrest master plan in the chat for those that want to get caught up. We haven't met since our last Planning Commission meeting, and our July 20th meeting is postponed. The next time we'll be meeting is August 17th. So if you want to get updates, if you want to just click on that stpaul.gov departments, and the Hillcrest, all the Hillcrest updates are in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner DeJoy. Commissioner Grill. Oh.
All right, let's try this again.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. So the Stationary Task Force has a meeting on July 13th from 6 to 8 p.m. On the agenda that night is the local economic conditions, local market conditions, information on station typologies, and an engineering update. So if folks are interested in listening in on that meeting, the information is available on the ramseycounty.us website under Riverview Corridor.
Okay. Thank you for that, Commissioner Grill. And then we'll move on to old business. New business or items that commissioners would like to add to the agenda for 2 weeks from today. Seeing none, we will go ahead and adjourn the July 9th, 2021 St. Paul Planning Commission. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks everybody for your thoughtful comments and your discussion on the grand rezoning. And I hope everybody has a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.